Hello, everyone. This is T. Scott Randall. Today, I want to talk to you about ableism. And like any other ism, obviously, it's going to be pretty negative. But the idea of my project and the focus of my annotated bibliography was this discrimination against those that are disabled or those with a disability, and how the military is sort of a focal point of ableism in our society. In other words, it all of the foundations of ableism, and we'll go through all the different provisions on it, but just how it all comes together with the military, and how what I thought about how is it could be any other way, and that's sort of what to be worked out in my paper. But that being said, the annotated bibliography focuses on sort of the rubric of analysis, which is ableism itself. So the title of my presentation is called The Case for Perfection: How the Army's Health and Physical Standards Encourage Ableism and Protect a Nation. So we've got that tension there. What is this thing called ableism? Well, it's defined a number of different ways through the sources, but here are just a couple. And so Qatari says that ableism is an overarching act of prejudice or discrimination against disabled people and the devaluation of disability itself. And then it corresponds with able-bodied neurotypical privilege, the set of unearned privileges held by non-disabled individuals. Ableism values physical, emotional, and mental capital following socially constructed expectations of ability and results in compulsory able-bodiedness, demanding that disabled individuals do whatever it takes to enact a non-disabled identity however possible. And what I want you to do is think about the actor Christopher Reeves. He was the fellow that played Superman in the 80s. I don't know if you know his story. He was in a riding accident and he became disabled. He had a spinal injury, and he actually had I think he had even a breathing tube. But that being said, his whole goal when you saw him communicate was, I want to get better. I want to get where I can walk again. All right. Think about that story as we go through this. So we've already seen that ableism is the prejudice against the disabled. It values able-bodiedness. And Jammer says that ableism is deeply seated at the level of epistemological systems of life, how we think of knowledge itself, personhood, and livability. Ableism is not just a matter of ignorance or negative attitudes toward disabled people. It's a trajectory of perfection, a deep way of thinking about bodies, wholeness, and permeability. Bluntly, ableism functions to inaugurate the norm. What is normal is able in our society. Ideas, practices, institutions, and social relations that presume able-bodiedness or non-disability as a normative organizing principle against which all are assessed, generating a collective understanding of disability as a diminished state of human being. That is ableism. Now, Fiona Campbell, she was a theorist that I found that really focused on ableism. Of course, the flip side would be disability studies. But her work on ableism itself was very, very nuanced and just really smart to read. So she said that ableism is essentially a view of disability as inherently negative and in need of cure or elimination. And you think about it. So Christopher Reeve, he talked about his disability in terms of, I want to beat this thing. I want out of this chair. Disability is always harmful. It's unacceptable. Reason as truth becomes discourse dependent and in turn generates notions of ability and disability. Ableism assumes individual autonomy and the capacity to control the mind and the body. We have the ability to decide whether we want to be better or not, if obviously the technology is there. So two facets of ableist relations are an idea of the normal, which I think we can all understand that, and a constitutional divide. So what is this constitutional divide she's talking about? Well, it's a division between what is considered normal and what is not, what is aberrant or pathological. That divide makes one choose, right? You are either on one side or the other. And in a lot of disability studies readings, they talk about outing oneself as disabled. So if you have a sort of a non-visible disability like a mental health issue, a lot of people mask that. They hide it. They want to be on the, quote, normal side of what Campbell's talking about. If they have to, or in some cases they're outed, then they move over to this apparent side, the one that is not necessarily accepted. And so she says, if an individual was able to reimagine disability as a positive attribute, which is going to be very tough, you got to think about it, that is not in need of acceptance, the contours of ableism become possible to even view. So the idea that normal is neutral is what she's getting at. So one of the readings I had was an author trying to tie whiteness to ableism, because to get outside of, if you're someone that is a white individual, how do you actually see whiteness? You really can't until you put a different lens on. And that's what Campbell's saying here. If you actually accept that disability is a positive attribute. Okay, so Christopher Reeve, how is that possibly positive that he's in a wheelchair? Well, he has to decide that, number one. And number two, being in a wheelchair happens to most people, right? You think about the elderly, someone in a car accident, whatever. Being in a wheelchair is something that's it's normal, right? It happens all the time. So what is his drive? I am not going to be here in this chair. Well, obviously he was young. I mean, not that young, but middle-aged. But the idea that can't be normal for him, Campbell's getting at, saying, well, I'm sorry it happened to you, but that is normal. And if you can accept that, and it can be positive for you, in other words, you can understand other people that are in a wheelchair, you can understand their needs, and then you can advocate for ways that the environment can be changed so that those folks and Christopher Reeve at that time can function better, then that can be positive, right? So all through the literature, there's this idea of the medical model of disability versus the social model of disability. So that dichotomy is in 19 out of 20 of the readings, right? So the medical model is kind of what Christopher Reeve was at. So disability exists in the individual. He was the one disabled. It's something to be cured or treated. His inability to walk, he wanted to cure it. It was negative. He did not want to be in that state. And he viewed it as obviously in need of correction. It was abnormal, deviant. I'm not like this. Well, flip that around. The social model of disability says, wait a second. Now, you may have an impairment, and what they mean by impairment is a physical condition. But a disability is something totally different. That is your inability to function in an environment, and that is socially constructed. That is the decision made by society on how they set up human relations. So one of the authors, Cherney, said, stairs are a device of oppression. If you look at it that way, then the social model, it's understandable, right? So an inability to walk, right, that's an impairment. That's a normal variation. There's a lot of people like that. At some point in your life, you're going to be at that point, right? So for the social model, you're trying to improve the environment so that an impairment does not become a disability. So they gave the example, the inability to speak is an impairment, but the inability to communicate, because society has not made education about sort of sign language, et cetera, or technical devices available, that makes it a disability, right? That's the two models. Well, there's a critique of this social model as well. Even though most of the articles adopt right off the bat the social model, there were some critiques. Number one, that it's utopian. You cannot change the environment for every possible human variation of disability. It cannot happen, and it's utopian to think you can. Another critique was that look, if you're critiquing capitalism and how it views disability as unproductive or inefficient or whatever, it's really from a Marxist perspective. Well, you better turn around and say, well, even under a Marxist approach, folks with disabilities get more resources than those that do not. So people are not on an equal footing, and a lot of that. The problem is tied to the inability to work as well, certainly under a Marxist ideas. But the bottom line is, it's sort of if you're looking at it from a utilitarian perspective, disability is a problem because it does take more resources. And then the other big critique was that it de-emphasizes the body. And this is a big departure from a lot of disability discourse, because the social model is really looking at the environment, not the body itself. It's not looking at the adaptability of the body, but more of the adaptability of the environment. So here's some examples from the literature. I'll go through these pretty fast. The first one is really interesting. It was from a legal point of view. It talked about these two torts, which is that's a civil wrong against two individuals. One person wrongs the other. Well, the two torts are wrongful birth and wrongful life. Those are recognized torts in about 25 states. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you can collect money from a hospital, usually, because of the wrongful birth of a disabled child, is the way they're looking at it. So you can collect money from a hospital because you got, defective advice about what was wrong with the fetus, or what was wrong with the mother that she passed on to the fetus, etc. So you were giving wrong advice. The baby happens, and that is considered collectible. That's a wrong. You can be compensated for that. So obviously that has tremendous ableist overtones right there, those two causes of action. Another one was about motherhood and disability, which was absolutely just so well written. So if you think about motherhood with disability, I mean, it just amplifies the whole topic. I mean, because you want a mother to be, and she listed out the sort of the stereotypes as fast-paced, endless energy. You're on the go. You're stable. You're independent. You're running around. I can see my wife and what they're saying, but they're saying that's not a disabled mother. So right off the bat, I'm not what you think of as a mother. Then you take on all of the discourse about the womb and how it's a place of risk. It's all the things that go along with society, looking at a pregnant woman. And then if it's a disabled person on top of that, someone that the society doesn't even view, you can take care of yourself. It's just tremendous amount of stigma involved for these mothers. And just a fantastic article to read. And the last one was about the rhetoric of IBS. This was just an excellent article as well. The author talks about how society is trying to control the discourse about this topic, which is not a very obviously socially accepted topic. And so obviously that comes back to Foucault, and she talks about the repressive hypothesis that we talked about in our class, in terms of people talking about shitting right? But they do so in different contexts in certain areas, and they talk a lot about it, but it's not accepted in other areas. And so she talked about, obviously it's a taboo during a meal, even though the meal is what freaking causes it. And then for women especially, issues with sound, smells, etc. It's even amplified for women. So there's a feminist aspect to this. And on top of that, when a woman gets IBS, the issue is, oh, what caused that? What caused it? Is it some kind of nervous thing? Is it something wrong with you? When men get it, she talked about that's not the issue, right? But the discourse now with the ads with the drugs that are coming out to address this issue, they're talking about more as in the body is the cause of it. So it's sort of removing that sort of stigma from women, but it is still there. But it talks about more of, oh, you've got these unruly bowels that are causing all these problems. We got to get these things under control. So anyway, those are some examples. I leave them to you to read, but they were excellent. Great topic, and I look forward to reading you all's presentations as well. So thanks.